everyone, and welcome to our Heart for PCOS interview today with Dr. Katie. We're so excited to have her, and we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Katie's specialty, which is integrative medicine. So Dr. Katie, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I would love you to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do and how it can impact health for patients with PCOS.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a joy to connect with people in general. I live for connection. So it's really nice to be with people who are interested in health, and especially this area of integrative medicine. So I got into integrative medicine really very authentically. I grew up in Northwest Ohio and was the daughter of a family doctor out there who practices still stone cold normal family medicine, but it was really that beautiful model of like how to be a doctor that I saw from a really young age that made me interested in medicine. And when I got to medical school and tried to figure out what I wanted to do, when I got to my family medicine rotation, it just felt like I was coming home. I likened it actually to the way that I felt when I put on my wedding dress. I was like, oh, this is how I always thought I would look. And it felt really, really natural. And so I went into family medicine and did a residency at Columbia in the city. And while I was there, really lost a little bit of myself. It was really stressful. We were staying up all hours of the night and day for that matter. I was eating a lot of really poor hospital food, generally not exercising, and certainly not taking care of my spiritual self. And about the time that I tried to run a half marathon and injured my knee, I figured out I needed to another form of exercise, and I discovered yoga. And that was when everything really shifted for me. I wanted to become pregnant. I started doing acupuncture. I was doing the yoga. I was trying to gently work out, not crazy workouts like running around Central Park, but gentle workouts. I started packing my lunch every day for work. And that was where I really discovered the recapturing of my spiritual self and who I really was as a person. And I realized that I had discovered integrative medicine. And so I wanted to do a fellowship. And that's how I've been practicing for the last 10 years, this idea of bridging the gap between regular Western medicine and all of our Eastern complementary modalities, and doing that from a really thoughtful perspective of, I know a lot about Western medicine, but I also understand that there are rhythms in our life that are much more well attuned when we take a balanced approach. And so that's what I do for on a regular basis. And I love it. Like, I love it. I live for it.
And I love that you love it, because that means that you're really passionate about helping people. So that's great. So can you talk a little bit more about integrative medicine and how you take a full body approach? Because you kind of tuned into that when you were talking about like recognizing some of the things that your body needed and being more in tune with it. So what kind of approach, how can that approach help improve someone's overall health?
A lot of the things that you and I align on is this idea of like really listening to the body. And, people have lots of different ways of talking about this. And I know you and I have talked about like the wellness intuition, this idea of like, what is the intrinsic knowledge I have about the wisdom that exists in my body? And I think that listening to that wisdom is often really inconvenient. And the signals that we get are often overlooked because it just doesn't fit into our busy day. It's really inconvenient to think about like why someone has irregular periods or diarrhea or back is always hurting, because you know what, I've got to get on with my life. And that is what integrative medicine really does, is help us tune into those things, understand the reason why, what is the root cause, like what can we do, not even just to address like a blood sugar problem, but what do we do 2 steps before that, so that it never becomes a big issue to start with. And that's really where integrative medicine soars. And so I love that approach with the patient of listening to their story. Much of what we decide together is really based on what they tell me. I'm a very keen listener, and I pick up tiny little cues, and I use that story, those cues, to put together a pattern that then we can work towards based on someone's someone's what they're actually going to do. Because I could recommend till I'm blue in the face for you to do acupuncture, but if your life is too hectic for you to get here for regular acupuncture, then that's not going to be a great recommendation. So I'm always thinking about how can I meet someone where they are. And I think that's why integrative medicine is so helpful, is because it really meets the patient where the patient is.
And that's so important, especially with patients who have PCOS, because a lot of times they feel like their care is based on their symptoms. And when they see a provider, they're basically treating the symptoms and not looking at the whole person and how all those symptoms fit together. So how do you find different ways to work with symptoms beyond just supplements and medications? And why is it important to look at a person as a whole person instead of picking the different symptoms?
Yeah, I think you're right. We in Western medicine really symptom treat. Like that's what we're trained to do. I have a whole host of medications in my armory just to treat symptoms, but then the question is never really asked why. So sometimes the work that I do with patients is digging into the why. I mean, sometimes it's more lab work. Sometimes it's what I call fancy lab work. It's looking at stool analyses and saliva tests when it comes to hormones. Sometimes it's doing quote unquote fancy cholesterol testing to figure out what are the inflammatory markers, how sticky are my cholesterol markers, how densely packed are they, and all these things help us figure out like where is the intervention. The fancy cholesterol test is also fun because it tells us, are we makers of cholesterol or are we absorbers of cholesterol? And again, till I'm blue in the face, could recommend that a plant forward diet is going to be really great for you. But if you're already living a pretty healthy diet and you're actually a maker of cholesterol, then trying to influence a diet, while important, is not going to be like the thing that's actually going to do it for you. And so there's a lot of individualization that exists. And I think by listening and by talking to the patient and individualizing the treatment, and again, getting to the root cause analysis, then we make headway.
I wanted to go back to one of the things that we were talking about, which is wellness intuition. So can you talk a little bit more about what this is and why it's so important to listen to our bodies, especially when dealing with chronic conditions like PCOS?
I feel like when I personally listened to my body, because our bodies give us information all day long. When we listen to our bodies and honor what they have to say, then we start to make real headway in our health. And instead of feeling like everything is going wrong and our body is betraying us, which is a really common thing that I think we can feel, especially when it comes to hormones, and hormonal health, we can feel like our body's working against us. But if we sit and we really recognize all the beautiful things that our body is trying to accommodate for, which is it's internally wise. So if we start to appreciate that, then we can move forward in a more productive way. But again, that listening, that tapping into the wellness intuition is really inconvenient. And it takes a lot of nuance to listen to the body and what it wants. And, it's really convenient on a Friday night to be like, you know what, I have had a week. Like, I just want to have pizza and beer. And then you wake up the next day and your stomach's all gurgly. You feel like death run over, and your digestion's off the entire day. And the signal there, friends, is, you know what, pizza and beer in excess is not really good for me. But that's not a super convenient thing to listen to. And so what I encourage patients to do is like not completely avoid pizza and beer, because what would a life be if we couldn't have a little bit of pizza from now and then, right? Totally. But also just to listen to the fact that like maybe that amount is not great for us. And so maybe the next time we decide to mix our foods in a little bit different way. I also think about listening to the self when it comes to spirituality. And our brains are so busy on a daily basis. I don't know about you, but I wake up in the morning and my brain is like off to the races, ready to take on whatever is going to happen for the day. And so part of my own wellness intuition is listening to how crazy it feels upstairs in the penthouse, and actually try to bring my body back down to the basement, into the ground, to thinking about how can I actually anchor myself today so that I can move through my day in a way that feels really good to me, as opposed to just like a crazy race, which it can feel like sometimes. And all of that stuff really comes back to the signals that are in the body. And when the body, it feels like you're not working against it, that you don't think it's terrible, that you're trusted, that you love it, that it's working for you, we just have to believe that the hormonal signaling, we just have to believe that the stress signaling is better because it feels better in the body. So that's a little bit about wellness intuition.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned this because a lot of people don't understand with PCOS. It's more than just reproductive, metabolic, and hormonal. It also affects our psychological health as well. And there are a lot of patients with PCOS who suffer from depression, from anxiety, from eating disorders. And I think too much emphasis is again placed on separating out these different factors instead of looking at them all together. And when we make our bodies feel better, then our brains start feeling better. So I love this whole concept. And I think it would go a long way with a lot of patients because we deal with so much with PCOS.
Oh, I think you're completely right. It is not something that just is a part of one part of the body. It is not just the reproductive organs. It is a complex hormonal symphony that exists from head to toe. And you're totally right, that being cognizant of all the lifestyle factors and how it sort of makes its way into our lives is a really important thing to consider. Because if you're not doing all of those things, and it's not that you have to be a slave to any of these things either. I always take the 80-20 approach to everything. I'm going to do a pretty good job 80% of the time, and 20% I'm going to sort of just be okay with, right? That's the flexibility of life. But when we do a good job 80% of the time being attentive to these rhythms, our body rewards us because it feels better.
That's awesome. So I wanted to talk about a very special reason why we are here today, which is we're talking about the Heart for PCOS campaign, which we've done every February for the past 10 years. This is our 10-year anniversary. So thank you for joining us for the
Oh,
anniversary.
congratulations. That's
Thank
so exciting.
Yes. So it's very important that we talk about this because often, again, when we're talking about PCOS, a lot of times it focuses on just reproductive health, which is vitally important, but we're also missing all the other things that go along with it with cardiometabolic health. And women with PCOS are the largest at-risk group of women for cardiovascular disease. So we need to start refocusing and looking at some of these cardiometabolic issues. With PCOS, many patients deal with an array of symptoms that affect them metabolically, as we talked about, hormonally, psychologically. Some of the key factors include androgen excess, insulin resistance, inflammation that can contribute to high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and adipose weight gain, all increasing risks for cardiovascular disease. So, what would an integrative doctor recommend to keep hearts healthy with PCOS?
I think I will start the conversation by saying that it's important to be really individualized in this area of talking. But if we were going to make sort of broader strokes about cardiometabolic risk, about insulin sensitivity and androgen excess and those kinds of things, I think it comes really down to this whole chicken or egg sort of phenomenon. It's like this idea of like, well, where does this come from, and what are the things that are happening that are influencing it? And what we end up getting in it's this idea is just like, well, where does it begin and where does it end? Is it because I'm overweight that drives some of these things? Is it those things that are the hormonal changes that are driving some of the weight things? Is it the heart that's producing the inflammation or the risk factors there? And so it becomes very difficult to sort of tease out, like, where do we make the intervention? And then often it can sort of feel just like a big snowball that goes, down the hill and collects snow along the way, and then, ends up being quite destructive. So I think when I'm first working with the patient, for one of the first things I'm working with is understanding what the lifestyle is. How is this person fueling their body, 3 or so times a day? What is that doing to their blood sugar and their insulin secretion? How are those inflammatory markers that we can measure in the blood contributing? Is there some digestive things potentially that we can be paying attention to? We might do some closer looking at the heart, or I may suggest that they do that with a cardiologist or even with their primary care doctor. And we may decide that we're just going to do like lifestyle interventions at first, or we may decide that we need to do a combination of herbs and lifestyle, or sometimes medication, herbs and lifestyle. And I can't say enough about acupuncture. That is a really, really big component of my practice, and I have found to be so helpful for regulation of the menses, as well as some of the other like nasty symptoms that can happen along with our monthly change. And also really pulling together some of the inflammatory markers. And it's really amazing what you can see happen in the body just when you give it the right set of circumstances. Our bodies want to succeed, it wants to do a good job, and we just need to give it the right set of circumstances to do that.
Yep. And I love that you talk about acupuncture, because there's a lot of research that's been done recently on PCOS and acupuncture, and it's proven through research to how effective it can be in helping treat patients with PCOS. So I love that. And, maybe at some point we can talk a little bit more about this and help people understand acupuncture a little more.
I mean, that's a great idea because it is a little bit mysterious,
Yeah.
how it actually works and why it works. And I'm a big person of faith, meaning I just trust in the greater sort of universe. And I don't need to know the exact answer why. I need to just trust that in my own life that it has helped me so much. And, in fact, helped me have my two little boys in my life. And just, it's been a really big saver for my sanity.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I'm telling you, for 23 years since diagnosis, I feel like I'm losing my mind every day because people just haven't listened to me, like you said. And that's why it's so important that you are bringing that message to the community, that when you go and you see a provider, find someone who listens to you and who understands what you're dealing with on a daily basis. Because when you have that connection with someone who understands you and gets it and works with you, it can make a world of difference in your overall care.
Oh, I think you're so right. If you ever walk out of a medical visit and you're like, "Well, gosh, that was awful." Run away, don't go back. You should walk out of a medical visit like feeling like, "All right, like there's some things to work on, but like I have the tools, like I can do this." You should feel invigorated, not beaten down. And so I would encourage people to find practitioners wherever they are that they can trust, because you're right, that therapeutic relationship with your physician or with anybody else in your healthcare team, no matter what their credentials are, that is it. That is so, so, so important. And a big part about rebuilding the trust in the own body, that you have the team capable of helping through, whatever might be going on.
Absolutely. Okay, so when we're talking about care and this approach where we're working with our provider, what are some of the simple steps we can take to create a sustainable plan to minimize risks for cardiovascular disease?
I think it really comes down to like the four pillars. I try to bring in my own life it just back to four pillars, four things that I need to keep track of. The first one is making sure that we're nourishing our body with real food. I'm a big believer in a plant forward way of eating, meaning we don't have to only have plants in our diet unless that's something that's important to you. But I'm a big fan of trying to minimize, inflammatory animal stuff that's not serving us, as well as processed foods and extra sugars that aren't doing anything for us, and choose real food. And so I would say if you had to just make one little intervention on your plate, the first thing I would do is add more vegetables. And the second thing I would do is just look at the plate. And if there's not real food, then I would try to replace it with real food, stuff that exists in nature. And it sounds so silly. It's such an obvious thing. But how many times do we sort of look at our plate and we're like, where did all this stuff come from? So eating real food, as silly as it sounds, is actually a really solid strategy. And I think that, having more plants in the diet really makes sense. I think the second thing that I always come back to is, how am I moving my body every day? And if I'm not doing something physically active, whether it's just taking a walk or doing some yoga, catching up with a friend and walking to get the cup of coffee rather than driving. I mean, there are so many little opportunities for that, but physically moving the body every day is also something I think is really important. And we know, of course, that the more we use our physical bodies, the better we are at metabolizing glucose and, avoiding huge surges of insulin secretion as well. I also think sleep is a huge important thing, and sleep is probably one of our best mechanisms against hormonal dysregulation. And it stems from cortisol and epinephrine and norepinephrine and all our stress hormones, and involves things like melatonin and all our sex hormones. All of these things are driven by our ability to actually rest at night. And so finding that adequate time for sleep is really important. And then the last thing is really paying attention to the spiritual self. And this could take the form of yoga, of meditation. It could be going to church or doing Bible study, whatever floats your boat, but something that allows you to tap into the real deal part of yourself, the real you that lives inside, that needs attention. And when you pull all these four pillars together, proper nourishment, good sleep, right amount of exercise, and attention to the spiritual self, all at once, you've created for yourself this way of looking at your health in a new perspective. And that's the fertile ground then that you can plant something like acupuncture. You can plant a medication. You can plant some other intervention. But if you don't have that fertile ground to start with, then you're not going to have any flowers in your garden, because your soil is lacking.
I love all of this. I love your approach. I love the information you've provided. And I know everyone who is tuned in is going to want to learn more. So if you could please tell everyone how they can find you on social media, your website, or how they can reach out to you if they're interested in working with you.
Oh, I would love that. So I can see patients in Connecticut and New York. That's where I'm licensed. Otherwise, you can certainly connect with me on Instagram. I'm at Dr. Katie, DoctorKatie. My website's super easy. It's just drkatie.com, drkatie.com. And I have a beautiful website with blog recipes and other things. And if you're interested in connecting further, I have what's called Dr. Katie's Life Kitchen, which is a once weekly email with recipes and just my thoughts on all things health. And you can subscribe from my website there.
That's awesome. Dr. Katie, I can't thank you enough for your time and all your invaluable information that you shared with us today. It will certainly help keep hearts in our community beating strong. And I encourage everyone to join in for more of our special guests, our interviews, and don't forget to wear your red on February 3rd when we go teal to red to raise awareness for PCOS and cardiovascular disease. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and we will see you soon.